We're looking at the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. So the idea is that there is a day that is to be unique. Holy means to be set apart for religious purposes. It's sort of a hard word to translate, but there's this day that is to be different than all the other things, different than all the other days. And we see this idea of the Sabbath developed. I mean, it's a huge concept in the New Testament, but we see it developed very prominently throughout the Old Testament. Initially, we see it in Genesis chapter 2. We see this theme that God is going to rest on the seventh day. Not because God is tired, right, but as an example. So we read Genesis 2. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. The next time we see the word Sabbath is in Exodus chapter 16. So after escaping from the Egyptians, they're out in the desert, and they need God's supernatural care in order to survive. And so he's giving them water supernaturally, and then manna from heaven. And but the manna is only going to fall 6 days. Now, the first 5 days, if they take double the amount of food, it rots. It's a problem. But on the sixth day, God makes a provision. He says you can gather twice as much food as you need on that day, and it will not rot. It will not, fester and become rancid. Then 4 chapters later, Exodus chapter 20, we have the 10 commandments being given, and we have this commandment right here. It's the longest of the commandments. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into this one. It's the first one. It's the longest one. It's not the first one with a promise. That's the next one. Then later in Exodus chapter 31, God explains that the Sabbath is going to be a sign of the covenant. So they're going to be different than everybody else, all the other people, and the Jews, who for 400 years were slaves and they didn't have a day off. The Jews are different because they're going to do this radical, crazy, faith-filled declaration. They're going to depend upon God to meet their needs in only 6 days of work as opposed to 7. Then in Leviticus 23, there's more instructions given that we're to use the Sabbath for religious purposes, for instruction, for gathering, for worship, and for restoration, not just resting like I'm going to take a nap, but to have our soul restored, to have our mind, our moral compass sort of reset. And then in Numbers 15, we're told that breaking the Sabbath is a capital offense. And then we get further into the Pentateuch, and we see that there's more instructions given on what's to happen to different people based on how they're keeping it or not keeping it. And then we have, when we get out of the Pentateuch, which is just, again, code for the first 5 books of the Bible, the books that were written by Moses, sometimes referred to as the Torah. So when we get out of the Pentateuch and we get into the prophets, which is the second big section, the Old Testament has the law, the Torah, the Pentateuch, has the prophets, and then it has wisdom literature. So when we get into the prophets, we see the prophets are ranting about the fact that the Jews are not keeping the Sabbath. Isaiah's mad because although they were technically keeping it, they weren't keeping it in terms of the spirit of their heart. Jeremiah tells them that they're going to lose, they're going to fall, they're going to be overrun. Jerusalem's going to fall because they're not keeping the Sabbath. Hosea will say, use it or lose it. Amos is going to weigh in, and there's just all this stuff about the Sabbath. It's a big deal. It's an important commandment. Have a good day.